Before I begin this Fish for Fun video, I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite YouTube channels, and that is Fishing618. Nick does a fantastic job. I love what he does, and one of the things I like most about his channel is the emphasis that he places on tiny creek fishing. I grew up fishing a lot of these tiny creeks when I was a lad growing up in Mark Twain National Forest, and I often feature creeks in my own videos, but the creeks that I have been featuring are what I call small creeks, not tiny creeks. So I decided that I wanted to do a tiny creek fishing video. The bridge that you see in this picture is located about 15 miles from my house, and I drive over this bridge at least 6 times a week, and I had never taken the time to go down and look at the little creek, much less fish it. So I decided it was time to do so. So come along with me. Let's see what happens. As I finished walking through the weeds and underbrush and stepped out into this small creek, I was amazed because it was absolutely beautiful. Because of the abundance of larger trees and the high rails on each side of the bridge, you can barely see this little creek from the highway itself. Like most tiny creeks in Missouri, the water was so clear that it appeared to be almost transparent. After these first few holes of water, I began walking on up the creek, and suddenly I noticed that there was no water except for some wet patches in the gravel. I didn't know what to do, but I decided to go ahead and walk up and see what I would find. As I continued walking up the little creek, I began finding small patches of water, not enough to fish in, but enough to encourage me to keep going. Surprisingly, the further I went up the little creek, the more water I found. But the water that I found was always shallow, with no signs of fish anywhere. After a couple of 100 yards or so, I came upon this hole, which looked promising because it appeared to have 18 inches or so of water in it, and I could see a shade that might provide cover for the fish. I also observed an increase in the size of the minnows and the number of minnows, and that was encouraging. I looked this little hole over a little bit longer and decided that this was the one that I was going to try to catch my first fish in. I got out my little 3-foot rod and began stringing it up. I placed a small float about the size of a pencil eraser on the line, and about 8 inches below that I put an 1/80th ounce black jig and tipped that with a small piece of gulp worm. I stepped back stream a ways and stood there a while before I started fishing my way back up toward the shadow. My first strike was an imaginary strike as my little jig briefly hung up on a rock. I continued to fish all the way up this hole with no success, and as I got to the upper end of it, it was beginning to get shallow, but I noticed another shadow, so I decided to give it one more try. Finally, I got a strike, and it was fish on, as they say. I was as thrilled to catch this little minnow as most people would have been with a 5-pound bass. After I caught that little minnow, I continued to walk up to the end of the hole, and when I looked upstream, once again, there was no water. After walking quite a distance up the riverbed, I began finding patches of shallow water again and investigating them to see about the possibilities of catching fish in them. As I walked up this little creek, it was difficult to stay focused on what I had come there to do. The place was so beautiful. Finally, another fish on, and it's the kind of fish that I came here to catch. My heart's beating like I'd caught a big walleye. The further I go upstream, the better this water's looking. I'm using 2-pound test line so I can throw as far as I can, but this rod is so limber that I can hardly cast it out. If you don't make long casts in this clear water, you scare the fish before you get to them. See one. Good one. As I release this little long-eared sunfish back to the water and begin my trip back to my car, I feel sad because I don't know what the fate of this little fish will be. If we have lots of rain, he may be able to survive the summer. But if we don't, the water will dry up. And if he does survive the summer, the cold winter will eventually come and freeze the water in the little creek. But that's nature. We're out in nature now. Nature is that part of our world that has been unchanged and untouched by human hands. And as I take the shortcut where the creek used to run so that I can get back to my car a little quicker. I think what a privilege it is to be out in nature and to see things the way they were originally. And I wonder how many people get to do this.